Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always for the podcast is Danny Gillette, my co host. And we're back here on this Wednesday morning for another episode of the podcast. And we're going to discuss Nebraska's spring press conference, the spring football press conference with Matt Rhule and a bunch of players. So we'll discuss what we learned there and some of the key tidbits. We're also going to look at some college basketball stuff, whether the Huskers will be playing in a postseason tournament, the college basketball crown, as well as some recruiting notes, some roster potential reinforcements for the 2025 26 Nebraska basketball team. So we'll get into all of that here in just a second. Before we do, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get into the comments section. And Danny, how are you doing this morning?
Good. Just trying to keep up with all the college basketball transfer portal news and, of course, the spring practice press conferences. So there is still a lot to cover.
Yeah, there's a lot of things happening. I know we haven't seen, a lot of transfer portal stuff like, Nebraska guys or anything, but there's definitely players going into the portal and, a few guys that Nebraska fans might be interested in. So, we'll definitely be monitoring that going forward. I'm sure it's only going to be a matter of time before Nebraska kind of starts, reaching out to these guys. And the portal opens, I think, like the 24th, March 24th, or it might be later than that. But it doesn't mean that guys aren't getting talked to already. As we know in the world of college athletics, there is no tampering is legal. I guess I'll just say that in the way that now. So, but before we get to basketball, we'll touch on that in just a second. Matt Rhule went to the podium on Tuesday to meet with the media. Rocco Spindler also met with the media. Dason McCullough. So when they offered some interesting takes, it's always interesting when Matt Rhule, I think, goes to do press conferences because he really is, for the most part, an open book. I mean, he is very honest about things. He opened up the press conference with all the players who were missing due to injury, which I thought was a good thing to do. And to start there was some interesting names. Turner Corcoran's going to be out. I guess the one that stood out to me, Gunnar Gatula, is going to miss the spring. Carter Nelson, which we kind of expected. Turner Corcoran, Henry Latosky is going to be limited, but a few guys on the offensive line are going to be limited. So it strikes me maybe as a chance for, like a guy like a Gibson Pyle, Grant Bricks, Sam Sledge, some of these guys to, kind of make their case to be in the starting lineup next year. So what do you think about some of that injury information, I guess, to start?
Well, you hit the nail on the head right there. Some of that injury information to me leads me to believe that there will be opportunities like a Gibson Pyle or a Preston Tamua or guys like that to have a chance to show what they can do. And it's not like these Pyle and is a freshman with zero experience. He's been in the program since last season now, so he kind of knows his way around a little bit. And this will be an opportunity for some guys to really kind of assert themselves, or at least put themselves in the conversation at the positions. One guy who I thought was interestingly named is Tristan Alvano, and I know he's been dealing with injuries throughout his Nebraska career, so that part isn't interesting. It's just interesting that these injuries still seem to be nagging with him, and with the success that John Hull had last season at the kicker spot, you wonder, is this something that puts Alvano's, not career in jeopardy, but does this put him at a disadvantage already to begin the 2025 season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be difficult to unseat, John Hull at this point, as long as he's being consistent making kicks, which he did at the end of last season. I mean, when the snaps were good, I do think this will probably be a competition in the fall, but just if Hall has a really good spring, I think that's going to make it difficult. I know that they have talked about using Tristan as a kickoff specialist, so that may be his role next season if he can get healthy. But as far as place kicking, I think it is going to be an uphill battle for him, and he might, and not that this is what he wants or what anybody wants,
Right.
but he might need the guy ahead of him to struggle a little bit to get his opportunities. So I mean, really all he can try to do is get healthy, and when he gets his chances in practice or whenever, just make the best kicks that he can. And but it's not a bad thing for Nebraska to have that depth, but who knows how long that's going to last. I mean, with the portal and everything, I honestly don't know what year John Hall is at this point, so I'm not sure if they're how that syncs up in terms of their what class they're in. But for Nebraska, I mean, you've got a guy at the end of the season you finished with confidence in, and so I would assume that he's going to go into the fall as the guy. And with Tristan missing the spring, I think it's going to be tough for that to change.
Yeah, I agree. And I believe you also have another kicker, Nico Ottomanelli, who could also kind of put his name in the conversation there too. So the kicking battle is going to be interesting again this season, and I certainly wish the best for Tristan, and I hope he can heal up and be okay. There's just now competition at the kicker spot.
Yeah, and I think that's probably not a bad thing.
No.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And speaking of kicker, Matt Rhule talked about hiring Mike Eckler on Tuesday and why he decided to do it. And it just was interesting. And just for the record, John Hall is a redshirt freshman. So, and this was last year. So he was a redshirt freshman on last year's roster. Albano was a sophomore. So if he took a redshirt year, they'd essentially be the same year. So, I mean, just to clarify that. But my Rules talked about how when some former players and media members were talking about Eckler, that made him want to not hire him. But after they did the interview, he said that he couldn't get him out of his brain. And just the things that we've heard from Mike Eckler so far, he said that, Nebraska is going to speak with their pads. And just, some of the things that he said, he's talked about Matt Rhule is the best leader he's ever been around, which I think is pretty, noteworthy, realizing some of the coaches that Mike Eckler's worked for. But yeah, I think that they're going to improve with the special teams. And it's also interesting to me that some NFL teams tried to hire away Corey Campbell and some other people on the support staff for Nebraska. So my takeaway from all that is Nebraska really did a good job in putting this staff together, with the general manager, which they talked with Pat Stewart. Rhule talked about that, hire more and becoming more like an NFL team. Keeping your strength coach, adding Mike Eckler, adding Dana Holgerson, a former head coach, adding John Butler, who's now in his second year with the program. But really, to me, it feels like, his first full season, because last year he had to come in at such a late point. I feel like he was in a tough spot, and he still did a good job. But I feel like this year he's really going to be able to do it, have a better rapport with his players. And I think that's going to help him overall, just, in terms of his job as the defensive coordinator. So one of my big takeaways is I think Nebraska absolutely killed it in, building this staff this offseason.
Yeah, they built an NFL type staff. And, when you look at some of the names and you see what their resumes are, it's clear that Matt Rhule has came into this offseason with a focus to build out the staff and a bigger focus, I think, in player development. And I think you're going to see that with Mike Eckler. I think you're going to see that with Terry Braden. I think you're going to see a continuation of that under John Butler now in his first, full season as Nebraska's defensive coordinator. So there's a very clear plan here. And, I think this coaching staff is much more suited for the Big Ten and today's college football than maybe the previous staff was.
Yeah, I agree. And, with Stewart, I think a lot of things, it's a lot of the stuff that we said, but evaluating players in the portal, but also, assigning the right market value to them. I think that's going to be an important thing going forward, like really evaluating these players and what their value should be, right? Because there's not an infinite amount of money that Nebraska can spend, so you can't really go say like, hey, we're going to spend, $700,000 on Rocco Spindler and have him be a bust. You know what I mean? So I think that's part of it. But then also just saying like, hey, this is how much we're gonna spend for like a tight end. Like we're not gonna break the bank for a tight end. We're not gonna break the bank for certain positions. And I think all of that philosophy will help. And Matt Rhule really said it at one point. He said like we had, 4 or 5 people like in this room, and that was less than what some other college people had in terms of like scouting and that type of stuff. And he's like, now it looks like an NFL operation, and that's what you need to have, and that's what the big boys have. And so when they made this hire, to me, it felt like, and I mean, Stewart, the general manager, I felt like it was a big boy move and another step kind of saying like, hey, we're going to do everything that we can to try to win. And, he even talked about the revenue sharing with the Tennessee game and how they're just the financial implications of like, you need money to win. So, whether it has to do with like the playoff or anything else, I think at the end of the day, Nebraska was like, we're going to make more money if we play these home games, and having more money is going to help us put out a better football program. And as much as people don't like that, that is the truth. So I think Nebraska's making the right moves, and they're doing everything that they can to win. And I, as a fan, that feels good.
At the very least, they're keeping up with the Joneses instead of ignoring the trends or falling behind. And that in itself, right there, is an improvement from some other years. I'll say that. And, I think when you look at these general managers, people are, oh, general managers in college football. What is this? The NFL? Well, it's trending towards that way. I mean, we are seeing an NFL model in college football now, and that's just the way it is. And I think, as Nebraska struggled for the longest time to even get the ship righted on NIL. And now they have, an athletic director who supports NIL. They have a general manager. They're starting to really be forward thinking in regards to, I'm not going to say the future of college football, but how college football is trending. And that's very important. And a lot of that can be attributed to Matt Rhule.
And another thing that could be attributed, I think, to Matt Rhule, which I thought was interesting, Rocco Spindler talked about the mat drills, and we've heard about these are no joke. And he said, these are no joke, and they were unlike anything that he'd ever done at Notre Dame. He even called his parents because Nebraska, like, to explain to them that Nebraska takes these mat drills so seriously. So I think that that's a positive step. I mean, the Matt Rhule is putting these guys through the grinder. They're putting in the work this offseason, and I feel like Spindler's going to be a big time addition. I liked some of the stuff that he said, but also I came away from this press conference, and not that I was excited about the defensive line, but like Rhule pointed out that he feels really good about how the defensive line is going to play next season. Dason McCullough, didn't shout out, but I mean, he talked about Williams Nwaneri being, looking like a first round pick. And Rhule also talked about some other guys that have been kind of ready and waiting their turn. And I took that like, Riley Van Poppel, Keanu Davis, Cameron Leonard, Elijah Judy, some of those guys who are coming back on this team that are going to have to take, big leaps. I think they will. And then when you add Nwaneri and, Dason McCullough, who, I would take him over James Williams in a heartbeat in terms of a pass rusher. So like, to me, I think Nebraska, upgraded there. I think you look at Nwaneri, you look at Jalen George, who's going to miss part of the spring. Leonard, I think, is a very similar guy to, Princewell Umamalian. So for the most part, I think Matt Rhule's right. This defensive line is going to play very well. And I came away from the press conference, feeling even better about, Nebraska's defensive front.
And I feel like the defensive line instruction led by Braden will be slightly better too. Not that Knighton was a bad coach. I thought Terrence Knighton was actually a very good coach. But when you have somebody coming in from the NFL who could have honestly taken, other NFL jobs and is a Super Bowl champion, I mean, I think that certainly means something as well. So I know a lot of fans and even us were kind of wondering what the direction of the defensive line will be. Well, I think it will be going upward, and I think that's the direction. And I'm very interested to see the leap that Cam Leonard is going to make this year, because he had a relatively down year last year. I'm not going to, crap on him too badly, but if he can take that next leap and be the impact playmaker that we know he can be, that's going to make the defensive line even stronger.
Yeah, and he it wasn't like a terrible season. He just didn't take the big leap that we thought he was going to take, but 3 tackles for a loss, half a sack, 16 tackles. So I mean, he still, had some good moments for sure. Like he had especially like against Colorado, 1.5 tackles for loss, half a sack. So he just needs to be more consistent. You've also got, Willis McGahee, the fourth, who's going to be making an impact this year, I think, as a pass rusher. So yeah, I just feel like overall this defensive line, and I also like how they're going to be used. I think they'll be used in a different way. I don't think it's going to be, that 3-3-5 as much. I think you're going to see more kind of like 3-4 type principles. And you might even see more 4-man defensive fronts. I mean, the 4-2-5 essentially. A lot of teams, you talk about the 3-3-5, but even last year, Nebraska played a lot of what essentially was a 4-2-5, in rushing the passer. So, but overall, I mean, I just look at the different pass rushers that they have, and I think it's pretty exciting, because it's like, Williams and Nwaneri's there, and I know they're expecting things from him, but I feel like they could have a solid pass rush without him really making that much of an impact this season.
Yeah. And, I think the way you can come at in offense from the perspective of rushing a passer, you can put guys on the edge, you can blitz them late, like we saw Vincent Shavers do in that bowl game against Boston College, that kind of delayed blitzing action. You can allow them to free form a little bit and just focus on, getting them to rush the passer, period, not any specific sort of scheme to put them in, because I think their athleticism allows that. And so there's a lot of different ways they can go defensively. And I know pass rushing in previous seasons has been difficult to find for Nebraska, and I don't think that's going to be the case this year.
Yeah, I think they have a lot of, edge versatile types, that are edge, jack, whatever types. And then you've got, your traditional defensive line guys, Jalen George, Leonard, who are gonna, rush like with their hand in the dirt type of thing. But and Noweri, I guess you could put in that mold too. But then McCullough, McGahee, like I said, there's a lot of Dawson Merritt is another one who could be, a pass rushing type. I think they're gonna see where he fits best, but I just like all the different pieces that they kind of have coming together.
Yeah,
Rule also talked about another key thing was the backup quarterback, and it seems to me like it's basically going to be Jalen Gramstead. It's going to if anybody takes a snap this year besides Dylan Raiola, it'll be Jalen Gramstead outside of like garbage time, like trying to get guys snaps type of thing. I think like Marcus Davila, he said that Holgerson was very comfortable with adding Davila, Dane Key, and Hardly Gilmore. So to
as he should
me,
be. Yeah,
yeah, and the receivers obviously make sense, but to me, I think the quarterback, that's like the important part of that. And we talked about Davila, and he was ranked higher than Daniel Kalen. So like I know that some people were like, "Oh, we lost this developmental quarterback," but added another one in Davila who is from the same class, spent a year with the Big Ten team, and now he's going to get a year to develop under Holgerson, who actually had an interest in him before when he was at Houston. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I think he can develop as that third quarterback. You've got TJ Lateef going to be that number 4 guy who I really don't, foresee him getting on the field this year. And yeah, hopefully none of them have to play at all except in garbage time.
well, I think when you have a better offensive line like they do this year, then that takes
Yeah.
takes some of that worry away. I think Davila is really, really interesting. He's obviously, like you said, spent time with Purdue. He's got a very strong arm. He was a pretty good quarterback in high school, and so I think when you look at this quarterback room and where it was a year ago, now you add T.J. Lateef in there too. I think it's in a much better spot than where it was. And initially losing Daniel Kalen was kind of a bummer, but I think now that the dust has settled, we're seeing what the quarterback room looks like, and you have Davila, Lateef, you obviously have Gramstead, and then of course Raiola. I like the way it sits.
Yeah, I think it's perfect right now. Honestly, I think it's exactly what you want it to be. You have,
Yeah.
your starter, you have a backup who's not a threat to your starter, but can come in and play solid football and is a veteran, and Rule, said that those two kind of vibe off each other really well. So I think that's a healthy thing to have kind of that veteran backup. And Jalen Gramstead's kind of already expressed that he wants to be a coach in the future. So I mean, having a guy who already kind of has that mindset, I think as the backup quarterback, like I think that's really valuable. And then also to mentor, Lateef and Davila too. So I mean, you're going to have a guy who wants to be a quarterback's coach, playing quarterback and kind of mentoring all 3 of your young guys. So I feel like that's a positive thing. You have 2 blue chip quarterbacks, waiting in the wings. And so
Yep.
really, if you can just, thinking 2 years down the road, if you can develop one of them into a starter, then you're sitting pretty well at the quarterback position. So I feel like, yeah, Nebraska is in an ideal spot in terms of their quarterback room right now.
And even if one necessarily doesn't work out or something happens, now you can go into the transfer portal and get another one. It's almost like shopping, right? It's shopping, and you can pick up somebody when you need them, or you ran out of cereal, you can go get another box once that one's done. So it's kind of really interesting how the portal dynamic has changed high school recruiting, and also the urgency of recruiting, because for Nebraska, for some positions, and I guess this is true for anybody too, there's not as much urgency to recruit a specific position due to the fact that so many kids are in the portal now.
Yeah, for sure. And it's going to keep changing that way. I think we'll
Yeah.
see there'll be a chance to add some players in the spring portal as well for Nebraska football,
Yep.
but a lot of reasons I think to be optimistic going into spring ball. So
Absolutely.
let's shift now to college basketball, Nebraska basketball, which hasn't been as fun a topic for fans lately. But I guess the first thing we should mention, which was some really good news, Bryce Williams gets first team All Big Ten from the coaches and from the media. So that was good to see. You just never know how things are going to work out, especially when Nebraska finished as poorly as they did. But he clearly was the best scorer in the league this year. So I think he might have won the scoring title. I just didn't care about it after they lost, so I'd have to check on that. But I think actually the guy from Northwestern may have scored more points than him. But anyway, at any rate, it was an incredible season for him. He was the only Nebraska player to get any sort of Big Ten honors. But it's pretty interesting that he's we loved Keisei Tominaga, but he was third team or honorable mention, and Bryce Williams first team All Big Ten. So just it's interesting how that all works out sometimes.
If only we had them on the same team again.
Yeah, and Rink. Just think of that. We had Keisei, Rink Mast, Bryce Williams, and Juwan Gary all in the same. That's the team that should have won an NCAA tournament game. So.
We got screwed with the Texas A&M matchup, and I'll hold that opinion to this day. But anyway, congratulations to Bryce. I mean, he's been one of the most successful Nebraska basketball players in recent memory. He was so dependable, and I think ultimately he carried too much of the scoring load, which we saw at various points this season. And he did it well. You could tell by the end of the season he was out of gas, understandably, but by and large he was able to play at a high level the entire season. And you talk about the transfer portal kind of being a shot in the dark. Sometimes Nebraska hit really well with Bryce Williams.
And that's another reason why I want Fred Hoiberg to stay, is because I feel like look at what he did with, they brought in Tominaga, who basically nobody wanted out of the transfer portal, and turned him into an NBA player. Bryce Williams probably, if he doesn't get drafted, he's going to get a shot in the G League. His stock from Charlotte improved. Rink Mast went from a MAC team or wherever he was, the Missouri Valley, for Bradley. Now look at him. So I feel like these guys are transferring up, and Fred's helping them improve their not only their professional stock, but just they're playing a lot better. And I feel like that's something that Hoiberg's going to continue to be able to sell to people. Sam Griesel is another guy. Came to Nebraska, got a professional contract overseas. Derek Walker. There's a lot. They're not getting into the NBA, but these guys are getting professional opportunities because they're coming to Nebraska. And Fred Hoiberg knows how to develop players. Juwan Gary. Look at Juwan Gary. He basically was a bench player for Alabama, and he became a premier starter for Nebraska. So I just feel like he's got a lot to sell, and Fred, did have a statement on the radio the other day where he said, basically I promise that we're going to do everything we can to get back to the NCAA tournament. This is where he wants to be. This is what he's passionate about. And so I still think that people are crazy for wanting Fred Hoiberg to be fired. But at any rate, we've already discussed that. So what I wanted to discuss a little bit more is the postseason fate of Nebraska and the college basketball crown, which I know is complicated. I've been trying to wrap my head around the NIT selection process. So I'm not sure if Nebraska is going to get into the NIT because I think that they could get a selection into the NIT, but the crown basically is taking precedence. And essentially, you have the Big Ten, which is a TV partner of Fox. And so Fox is putting this tournament on essentially. And so it's all the conferences that they, have broadcast rights to: Big East, Big 12, Big 10. So the top two Big 10 teams that don't make the NCAA tournament have to go to the crown. They have to accept that berth. It's not a choice. So I think that's going to be where Nebraska ends up as one of the top two teams to miss the NCAA tournament. The only bummer about the crown compared to the NIT is that at the NIT, you could potentially host a home game. But I'm not sure if Nebraska made it, if they would be seated high enough to get a home game. So, there's that. But this tournament, I think, could be pretty fun because you're going to have 16, I think, Power 4 teams. There's going to be other teams invited. And I know it's not the NCAA tournament, but I would love to see Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary play again. And maybe they can make a run, get to 20 wins, and maybe win this college basketball crown tournament. I think that would be, it's not making the NCAAs, but it would be a better end than having nothing.
And the last time they played a tournament on a neutral floor, they won it all. So, maybe that's a good omen. But I would love to see these guys play one more time. I know, I'm frustrated with how the season ended, but if they have an opportunity to play one more time, why not? let's see what they can do. And ultimately, I feel like this team was a lot better than they showed, but we'll have to see how things play out, not only in the Crown, but for this program in the off season. I think this is going to be a pivotal off season. And you mentioned Hoiberg's comments on the radio. To me, what I heard is we're going to open up the checkbook. I hope that's what I hope that's what it means in real life. But I heard that they're going to be aggressive and things like that. And I'm wondering exactly how they're going to get better and do what Fred wants to do.
Yeah, they gotta spend more in NIL. They've done it in football, and I hope that they will do it in basketball, because you look at some of these guys who went to, people are talking about like, oh, Chucky Hepburn did this at Louisville and Frankie Fiddler, and the reason Nebraska didn't get those guys, NIL. I can guarantee you that's 100% the only reason. Like there's a like Louisville probably was offering Hepburn a hell of a lot more money than Nebraska, and the same thing with Michigan State. So like, I get being mad at Fred, but this Troy Dannon and Nebraska really need to give him the resources to be a top program. Otherwise, it's pretty damn hard. If you don't have the talent, it's pretty damn hard. So
I'll give him
we'll
a pass
see.
last offseason because Dannon was just coming in when everything
Yeah,
was happening. So we'll see this year. This year will be a better
yeah,
measuring stick, in my opinion.
yeah. And because it's like, I get the narrative of all these Omaha guys like playing well at other places, but it's like, not like Nebraska didn't try. They tried for every single one of those guys. There's a reason they didn't get them, and it's money. So that has to get fixed, or Nebraska's going to be recruiting the same guys from power from mid-major conferences, which they've done well at. Fred does well at that, but yeah, give Fred Hoiberg some NBA talent and see what this team can do. So what I was going to say though about the Crown, I want to make this final point that's inconvenient though, is that it's March 31st to April 6th. So that's after the transfer portal opens. So it's like, are you even gonna, how many guys are still gonna be on this team? I mean, I guess you could have Bryce, you have like all your senior type players, and surely Sam
Connor
Hoiberg's
probably.
not leaving.
I
Yeah,
mean,
Connor. So you probably have enough to field the team, but that is kind of one question mark about this tournament and some of these tournaments in that time period, is that it might be like the bowl game thing where guys are like, I'm in the portal, but I'm going to play in the
yeah.
college basketball Crown for. So I don't know. I guess that's just part of the college basketball landscape, but I'm excited about Nebraska's chances of playing in a postseason tournament, and hopefully they can win. Put together a run and win the Crown like they won the NIT back like 1996. That was still one of my best memories as a Nebraska basketball fan, is them winning the NIT, which is, I guess, sad, but it was still, I would still love for them to win a postseason tournament. So
I mean, that's not terribly sad. I mean, obviously you want him to win an NCAA tournament game, but I think the crowd will be interesting. It'll give the boys one last chance to play together and be able to kind of see what they have left. And I think the roster is going to look obviously totally different next year, but it'll be good to get hopefully most of this group together one last time.
yeah, I'm just looking at it. I'm trying to think of the last time Nebraska even like made it to the NIT and won, because it's been a long time since they've won a postseason game that wasn't like a Big Ten tournament game. So they've made it to the NIT a few times, and I know they won a few games under Miles, but just thinking about it, I mean, just from this team probably hasn't won a postseason game, like a postseason tournament game, in a decade. So I think that right there is reason enough to try to go and do something at the college basketball Crown.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking up right now the last time Nebraska won an NIT, and I'm trying to find an answer, but
Yeah, it's a little difficult. So it's been a while, so it'd be nice to have them get back to that. And the thing about the Crown, I know everybody's like, oh, it's not, we can't even make the NIT. Well, the Crown's trying to basically replace the NIT. They're basically trying to say that the NIT is irrelevant and that there's too many mid-major teams, and so they're trying to create a tournament that kind of focuses on the bigger teams. And so it's all about TV, because it
96 last time
96.
they won.
Well, they won games in the NIT. That was what I
games.
was trying to
Gotcha,
say.
gotcha.
But yeah, but at any rate, I forgot where I was going with that.
People were complaining about the Crown, and not having to be the NIT.
Yeah, and so I think, yeah, well, the NIT, those two things are changing. I know these tournaments are confusing, but really you also have the CBI, the CIT. So there's like 5 postseason college basketball tournaments, but even then there's only like 140 teams that make it, and there's 364 teams in Division I college basketball. So even if you play in one of these smaller tournaments, you're still one of only 40% of the teams to make it to a postseason tournament. So like I get it. I get it's frustrating, but I still want to see this team play again. So we'll find out about that on like Monday or Tuesday after the NCAA tournament selection show. It really sucks that we are sitting out the Big Ten tournament this week, so it is what it is. But
very underwhelmed.
Yeah, very very underwhelmed. So I probably won't be watching the Big Ten tournament very much because of that. So, but I will be. I will be watching the women's selection show on Sunday to see where our Cornhuskers get picked. And yeah, we'll go from there. So there still is going to be some Nebraska March Madness, just not the same as it was last year with both.
There's going to be March Madness, but maybe not the madness that everybody's thinking of.
Yeah. So, but at any rate, all right, you guys. Well, we'll cut it there. So thanks for hanging out with us for these past 30 minutes. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.